Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. On behalf of NH3 Clean Energy, I'd like to welcome you to this investor webinar. Today's session is in listen mode only. If you'd like to ask a question at any point, please type it into the chat box and we'll address it during the Q&A at the end. Presenting today will be Chairman Charles Whitfield and CEO Stephen Hall. They'll provide an update on the company and the progress across WAH2 Clean Ammonia Project, including the MoU signed yesterday with ITOCHU to advance ammonia bunkering and demand aggregation across Asia Pacific region. I'll now hand over to Charles and Stephen to run through the presentation.
Great. Thanks, Simon, and welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining us on this webinar. As Simon said, we wanted to provide context around the MoU that we announced yesterday with the ITOCHU Corporation. I thought a good place to start is actually to restate what the objectives of the company are. Basically, NH3 Clean Energy's mission is to lead the development of clean ammonia fuel production to meet the growing clean energy needs of the Asia Pacific region. This agreement that we signed yesterday goes to the core of what we're seeking to achieve. And so, to be honest, I was a little bemused and disappointed by the market reaction yesterday, or lack of reaction. Obviously 9% up was great, but I think we were thinking 90% might be more appropriate. But anyway, there we are. Obviously, our focus is on building and delivering the project, but we also want to make sure that loyal shareholders are getting value recognition for their trust in us. And so to that end, we're focused not only on expanding the breadth of our audience, but also the deeper understanding of the project amongst that audience. And hopefully we can address that at least in part today by looking at what the announcement has in terms of consequence for the project. As many of you know, because I speak to you, I speak to shareholders every single day of the week. And so I'm acutely aware of what's on everybody's minds. And so comments that I often get are things like, I don't know anything about the ammonia market. I need a world-class player who understands the industry to come in to give me confidence in the project. This is that deal. Or, I want to see the majority of the demand for phase one spoken for. This, again, is the ITOCHU deal. Or I want to see a strategic who's willing to invest in the project. This is that deal. Or, I want to see growth potential beyond phases 1 and 2. Again, this is that deal. So I can't overemphasize how important I think that this project is. And so if we go forward to a slide of, who our partners are in the project so far, I honestly think that this is the most important announcement, probably since Chevron, which was the first announcement securing our gas supply. And so as we run through this presentation, hopefully we can demonstrate to you why that is our view. So Steve, if you want to just do an introduction to who are ITOCHU and why they're such a key player in the ammonia market.
Sure, thanks, Charles. I guess the short answer is ITOCHU are one of Japan's leading companies. They've got a long and proud history from their inception in 1858. They're one of the big 5 Japanese general trading and investing companies. They have a very substantial market cap, as you can see on the screen, and have had annual trading revenues of over $100 billion a year. They have far-ranging interests, but of particular note to us are their interest and experience in energy and chemicals, in metals and minerals, industrial machinery, and finance. So they cover a heck of a lot of bases. They've also been in Australia for a long time. They actually started off investing in iron ore in Western Australia in the 1960s. So, Australia and Western Australia in particular is a part of the world that they understand and they're used to dealing with and investing in. And with all of that kind of background, if you like, that they are a real leader in the transition to marine fuel, to clean marine fuel, and specifically clean ammonia as that fuel. And you'll see here that we'll talk a little bit more about Asia, but they're also, looking globally at places as far afield as Spain and Egypt and so forth. So we're delighted to be working with them. What really sets them apart, I suppose, is their participation in the entire value chain. So they're interested in being part of the clean ammonia production. They're interested in establishing the supply chains, in designing, owning, and operating bunker vessels, and also the bulk carriers that actually carry the iron ore from Australia to our customers. And just to give you an idea of the sort of things they've been doing, that's really what the bullet points show here. But you'll see about 18 months ago, they signed up with a broad consortium to develop ammonia-fueled bulk carriers. So MAN are the people that have developed the engines. You can see there they've got major shipping lines, shipyards. So they've got a complete, the complete playing field, if you like, of the people that needed to be involved. Not just that part of the value chain, but they've actually already taken final investment decision and awarded a shipbuilding contract for an ammonia bunkering vessel. Now, this will be 5,000 cubic meters. It's a fairly small vessel, and it'll be used in Singapore primarily. Since July, when they announced that, they've announced a joint development agreement with Mitsui O.S.K. Lines, whose name you'll recognise from the previous slide, and that's all around ammonia bunkering trials. Again, with a focus on Singapore. And only a month or two ago, ITOCHU signed a joint development agreement with two other Japanese companies to establish ammonia bunkering hubs in Japan. So, there's a lot more action than talk when you consider ITOCHU. In terms of the MoU that we've signed, let me just dive into that a little bit. So it's the collaboration with a very specific set of objectives. The first one of those is clean ammonia bunkering operations in the Pilbara by 2030. You will see that is the same objective that we had with our joint development agreement with Pilbara Ports and Oceania, and also with our MoU with MOL. We are aligning all of the planets, if you like, to this goal. The second bullet point is actually quite different. So what we're talking about here is supplying clean ammonia from our plant for ITOCHU's bunkering operations, not in the Pilbara. So in other words, we've already mentioned Singapore, we've already mentioned Japan, and they have aspirations for other locations as well. All of those locations need clean ammonia, and then the question is, who's the best place to provide that? And I'll say a little bit more about that later. We're looking at aggregating 300 tonnes per annum of demand under this MoU. So together with the MoUs we've signed previously, we're now at 600,000 tonnes as our target offtake already covered. As I mentioned before, the fact that ITOCHU are interested in the full supply chain means that we are also exploring possibilities for their equity participation in the project and assistance with financing. Again, that sets this apart from previous MoUs and is a clear addition. And all of this really is in support of our final investment decision for the WAH2 project, which, as you know, is targeted for the end of next year. Just a word about how all of this fits into the plan. I suspect sometimes it's not clear how all of these different bits fit together, but it's part of a very clear strategy and a very clear plan that we've had for a while. So just talking through the slide here, bottom left, you can see NH3 Clean Energy. We established ourselves as the leading clean ammonia producer in the region. And frankly, that's a position that has only strengthened over the last year. We're working with Oceania, who are developing the only ammonia bunkering vessel that's been specifically designed for Pilbara conditions. Working with Pilbara ports to be able to supply clean ammonia bunkering across the entire Pilbara. So based initially in the Port of Dampier, but servicing everywhere from the Port of Dampier to Port Hedland and in between. Then we extended the collaboration to include MOL. And of course, they are one of the leading shipping companies on the iron ore corridor, and they're a leading shipping company in terms of ammonia as a clean fuel, and already have ammonia-fueled bulk carriers on order. And then that brings us to today, where we're again extending with ITOCHU, and the two, particular points of difference are the potential for equity participation and the extension of bunkering outside Australia to supply hubs across Asia. I'll hand back to you there, Charles.
Fantastic. And it's probably worth saying, as well as the equity participation, as I think we've mentioned before, with having these Japanese partners, it opens up our eligibility for financing from the likes of JBIC, which is preferential debt financing as well, which is again an important part of the overall jigsaw puzzle for our financing package for the execution of the project. So why is this step beyond the Pilbara into broader Asia Pacific so important? Well, Asia Pacific represents 45% of global demand for bunker fuel at the moment. And Singapore alone speaks of 36% of global maritime refueling. So it's an enormous opportunity. Singapore is absolutely dedicated to the decarbonisation pathway. And so access to that market with this partnership with ITOCHU is a huge step forward. Not only are we looking at a huge market today, but we have a large growth potential in that market. So the compound annual growth rate projected for the Asia Pacific maritime fuel market is around 3.5% between now and 2030. And in terms of clean fuel, it's a multiple of that. Other key ports in the Asia Pacific region, obviously, are the Chinese ports around Shanghai and Busan in South Korea, and also the Yokohama Tokyo port complex in Japan. ITOCHU have aspirations around all of these different areas. The Japanese market, again, a very substantial market with a very attractive growth rate as well. So you will have seen this slide before. This is us doing a bit of reverse calculation to be able to give you some idea of the quantum of ammonia demand on the Pilbara Iron Corridor route. And essentially here, what we've got is a projection of the ships which are currently either announced, ordered, or in construction over the next 10 years or so, and a projection of the implied ammonia demand which those ships will need. So with something relatively modest, like 20% of the bulk carrier fleet converting to clean ammonia, that speaks for all of our phase 1 and phase 2 production at the WAH2 facility. If you then move forward to broader Asia Pacific, like I say, Singapore is a huge market dominated by refueling of container ships and car transporters, auto carriers. And if you look at the same information in terms of ammonia-ready container ships and auto carriers, which are currently ordered or delivered, you're looking at almost 3 times the number of vessels as the bulk shipping coming in and out of the Pilbara. So a huge opportunity for us to expand into as time goes forward.
So just looking ahead at the development pathway, I mean, the punchline here is that there's a clear path forward. On the left there, you can see what we've achieved in the last 12 months. You know, all the technical work necessary to enter FEED and a whole suite of preliminary commercial agreements covering gas supply, CCS, CO2 transport to the CCS site, access to the port of Dampier, access to additional land at the port of Dampier, the joint development agreement focused on bunkering, and then bringing in the people that we've talked about previously in terms of MOL, ITOCHU, and the like. A couple of other points to call out is, you know, we've started on-ground work at the site. So fauna survey has already happened. The flora surveys shortly going to be underway. And we got approval for the West Australian Government's lead agency framework support, which is significant. That means we're now working with the government to facilitate approvals for the project. Turning our sort of gaze forward, a few near-term milestones here to be aware of. We're looking to register under the federal government's Guarantee of Origin scheme. That's significant because customers want to be very confident that they understand the emissions profile of the product. That's quite hard to do in some parts of the world, whereas the Australian government's Guarantee of Origin scheme is seen as it's almost the gold standard of certification. So that's actually quite an advantage for us. We'll also expect to hear around project execution in terms of EPC or BOO proposals. We are very focused on delivery of the project at the moment, and the reason for that is we want to ensure that there is an extremely efficient transition from FEED to project delivery. And we're working with several very substantial companies and experienced companies on how best to pull that together. Policy-based financing group. Policy-based financing, I guess, is a euphemism for people like NAIF, the Northern Australian Infrastructure Fund, JBIG, and some other entities. And several of these have the capacity to offer a concessional finance, which of course would be of interest. We've very much focused on the bunkering demand here today, but we're still very interested in cogen, in other words, displacing coal in power generation in Japan and Korea. And we expect to be part of the 2026 procurement processes for both of those markets. We're moving forward with our environmental approvals, not just doing the on-the-ground survey, but there's quite a lot of work being done with various parts of government and regulators to make sure that our path forward is smooth. And you can expect to see both the executive and the executive team and the board evolve as the scope of our work evolves and the risks that we're seeking to manage and the opportunities we're seeking to capture. So the best recent example of that would be Brent Gardner joining the board because of his deep engineering experience and very specific expertise in construction and commissioning in the Pilbara. And in terms of state and federal government support, we're going to be enjoying working with the Western Australian government under our lead agency framework approvals. We will also be applying for Commonwealth major project status in the not too distant future. So there's a lot on our plates, but we have a plan to deliver it, and we are quietly confident, shall we say.
Thanks, Steve. Simon, that is the conclusion of the actual presentation, but we want to leave plenty of time for questions and be able to hear from our investors if you've got anything coming through.
Absolutely. Thank you, Charles and Stephen. Just a reminder that if you've got questions, submit them in the chat box. And I actually had a couple came through via email, so I'm just going to start with those. They came through yesterday. The first one is there's a line in the announcement about contributing to the development of a compelling clean ammonia proposition. Could you expand on what that means in practical terms? Does it relate to scale, speed of delivery, pathways to green energy, or something else?
Shall I do that one? I guess arguably all of the above in terms of the contribution. Certainly, I mean, in terms of speed of delivery, I think we're on a fairly set pathway in terms of the actual rollout of initial production. So I don't think that's going to be accelerated at all. That is what it is. In terms of the timeline to expansion, definitely, it aids that. In terms of, I think it was it transition to green? I mean, we have, and actually, if you go back to that very first slide, we have a very specific viewpoint in terms of how we are looking to develop the clean ammonia energy market. So first and foremost, we are committed to delivering a commercially viable project, and that at the moment is blue. There's no two ways about it. I mean, you've seen further evidence even in the last couple of weeks of green ammonia and green hydrogen projects being shelved. So the market is blue. That is globally recognized now. That said, we are absolutely committed to trying to increase the renewable component of the project as and when we can do so. And so that means using renewable energy where we can, and ultimately introducing and transitioning to an electrolyzer-based system. But we feel that that's still a considerable way off. And the key thing at the moment is to establish the market and the infrastructure around clean ammonia, and that will actually in itself aid the ability for green to become viable in the future.
Excellent. There's one come through here that I'll just ask. I've still got some more that came through yesterday, but do you expect to sign more offtakes from miners?
Sorry, offtake from?
From mining companies, miners.
Oh, from mining companies, right. They're obviously a key customer for the Pilbara-based refueling. So they are, a key component of the conversations that we're having at the moment.
Can I maybe just jump in there?
Yep.
So we are in active discussions with the miners, as you would expect, because fundamentally they will be, if you like, paying for the service. However, who actually buys the fuel depends on how the miners choose to contract the bulk carriers. Sometimes the customer, so the miner, might be buying the fuel and just sort of contracting the boat or leasing the boat. Sometimes they lease the boat on the basis that the ship owner actually provides the fuel. So there are a few different ways to skin that cat, if you see what I mean.
Absolutely. Next one that's come through is in your last webinar, you mentioned there was interest from a group potentially interested to build, own, operate the plant. Is this still a legitimate option now you have potential interest from ITOCHU to invest in the project?
Yeah. So this is a frequent question from shareholders, and I've spent a lot of time walking through what our process is on this. Essentially, you can think of the project as being separated into multiple stages. For example, there is the hydrogen production component, or the ATR. There is the nitrogen production component, which is basically compressors and air separators. There is then the ammonia synthesis component, and then there's a lot of infrastructure around pipelines for CO2, for ammonia, so on and so forth. When we are looking at project execution, we're looking at two things. One is from an engineering point of view, the interaction and fitting together of those different components of the project. And then from a financing point of view, the fitting together and optimization of the financing package. So as Steve alluded to, we have multiple conversations going on around both of those. So for the engineering component, you have EPC, so engineering, procurement, and construction. And you also have BOO, which is basically a single party being responsible for all of the construction and operation of a component of the project. Those two can run in parallel, and different parts of the project can take on either one or the other, or a hybrid of those parts. And then on the financing part, obviously we're looking to optimize the attributable value to shareholders. And we want to make sure that as much of the value of the overall business comes to our equity holders. And so we are looking at beneficial financing from the policy financiers like NAIF and JBIC and so on. We are looking at equity from strategic partners like ITOCHU. We are looking at commercial debt financing from banks and so on. And we are in discussions with a group who has very recently put together a consortium of similar financing, and other participation from commercial investors. And we've alluded to the fact that we have some very large experienced funds who have done similar projects, who are in discussions with us. So it's a long answer to a short question, but when we're thinking about the BOO in the context of the project delivery, all of those different components are like parts of the jigsaw, the engineering jigsaw and the financing jigsaw that we're putting together. And so, yeah, all of those conversations are live. We basically have an agreement out that by February of next year, that there will be things which are in an announceable form around all of those different components of the project execution.
All right, next one. Is it possible to expand beyond stage 1 and 2 at the site? Do you see that as a possibility given the strong demand outlook you have discussed?
Yes, is the short answer. So the site that we've got, we could fit at least 3 trains on, if you like, so 3 times the size of phase 1. We have commenced discussions around some additional land adjacent. So the land immediately next to our site is vacant, basically. And so we are looking to expand our land allocation just so that we are very well placed for expansion.
All right. Next question. Is ITOCHU aligned with prices and happy on similar terms to Mitsui OSK? And then when do you expect to enter into the third phase of FEED, being the engineering work, and what is the piece required for this?
Sorry, can you just repeat the first? Are they
Yeah,
aligned on?
on prices and happy on similar terms to Mitsui.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, we've been pretty transparent in terms of our cost of production. And so, all of our agreements are in line with our financial model, essentially. And then, what was the second part?
Yeah,
Sorry,
the
Simon.
the second part is when do you expect to enter into the third phase of FEED,
Oh,
being
yeah,
the
yeah. Sorry.
engineering work?
Basically, like I say, in February, we will have, firm proposals. I mean, just to be clear, in our last webinar, we were sort of talking a bit about BOO, and I think at that time it was thought that we might have an initial announcement about a framework for working with BOOs. Now what we're looking at is by February a much more specific commercial proposal. So things are moving at exactly the same pace. It's just really around, what is disclosable and what isn't. But having that EPC and any BOO, firm proposal is basically a key component for then kicking off the engineering component.
All right. This one's about valuation. So the current market cap represents a significant discount to the MPV of at least 90%. This implies the market doesn't yet believe this project will be delivered. When do you think that will change?
Well, I mean, there are two ways of looking at it, and I guess I touched on this in the beginning of the webinar. I mean, one argument is we're just not doing a good enough job of explaining the story to the broader audience. So that's something which I'm very much focused on correcting. In terms of the actual valuation, I mean, it's an interesting one. At the end of the day, we have some great long-term shareholders, both institutional, retail, family offices, so on and so forth. The price is actually determined by, people who are, periodic traders and, if not day traders, then relatively short-term investors and so on and so forth. So I think that, there's a bit of a disconnect there, which probably impacts our current valuation. Again, if people have doubt about the delivery of this project, I mean, look, we continually are delivering commercial agreements which de-risk, aid and help to make more certain and expand the future potential of the project. And ITOCHU is, you couldn't have a better example. So I think that it's a process, and luckily we do have some equity research done on the company by an independent broker, and so they have a very firm view of where the share price should be or where the valuation should be at the moment. And we just need to continue to spread the word to get that recognition of value.
Okay, just on the valuation, Charles, well, what do you see as the key drivers going forward, I suppose, from here?
Oh, it's step after step after step. Like I say, I think last year we had 12 announcements out, or 12 or 13 within the last 12 months. And each one of those was an important milestone. I would argue that ITOCHU is a huge milestone in that. Obviously, execution and announcements around financing are going to continue to make it very obvious that this project is on a pathway where not only is phase one going to get built out in the near future, but there's huge upside as well.
All right, excellent. got one more, I think. You've mentioned the growing interest in clean ammonia globally. How would you describe the current competitive landscape, and where does WAH2 sit within that broader picture?
Steve, do you want to grab this one?
Yeah, sure. I think, in Australia and globally, electrolysis-based or green hydrogen and ammonia projects have been falling by the wayside. And the reason is it's just economics that no one can afford. There is no customer interest in the product at the price that they would have to charge, and so that's all part of why we're doing what we're doing. If you look, we used to have a slide a year or so ago that showed how we were kind of one of a kind in Australia, and there were maybe 140 or plus hydrogen and ammonia projects in Australia. We've actually just updated that analysis, and more than half of the projects have now disappeared. If you look at the projects that were potential competitors to us, we were one of 5 a year ago. We're now one of either 2 or 3, depending on how you want to count things. But the other 2 potential, blue ammonia projects have basically, one of them has made no progress or made no announcements of progress in the last year. The other has made one very minor announcement. And the reasons why they haven't been able to move forward and we have is that they don't have the advantages that we have, the choice of technology and the unique location that gives us access to bunkering, CCS, etc., etc. So there are major challenges that those other projects have, like there isn't any CCS nearby, or there isn't an established port, and so that's why they haven't made progress. But we have been basically carrying on regardless. If you broaden your lens from Australia to sort of Asia, it's hard to see a credible competitor for us.
All right. Look, I've just had one latecomer here, so I'll quickly answer this and then we'll probably wrap it up. I'll ask this, sorry, and you guys can answer it. What percentage of ownership is held by top 10 and top 20 shareholders, respectively?
We're slightly less concentrated than we were. I don't have the figures just straight off the top of my head, to be brutally honest. But the last equity raise was absolutely focused on institutional investors, and we brought in some very high quality institutions who share our vision of where the industry is going and where this project's going. The top end of the register is very stable. Most of the movement is in the sort of tail end of the register.
All right, thanks everyone who joined us today, and thanks to Charles and Steve for the presentation. I'll just hand back to Charles and Stephen for any final comments before we close.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone at this busy time of year, and wish everybody a very good summer and holiday. And we aim to be back in January with some more news. We've already started putting together a presentation for the new year, hopefully to explain a little bit more on project execution, which we've touched on today, and hopefully that will be useful to everyone.
Yeah, thank you all for your time, and if you do have questions, please just reach out to Charles or myself.
Thanks everyone again for attending. That concludes today's webinar.
Thank you.